Why space? Why Mars? Why the moon? Well, everyone knows about Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World that inspired generations of Europeans to explore the place we now call the Americas. So after the United States sent the first men on the moon in 1969, why aren't there constant expeditions to the moon? And why is Mars still a distant dream? Well, that dream died after the end of the Cold War when the United States had no competition against the Soviet Union and the public lost interest. This made sure that NASA was never the same organization that it was in the 1960s and 70s. But this dream did not die for one man named Elon Musk, as he started SpaceX and brought outer space back to the public discourse. So that video title, why space? Well, the three big arguments that I have heard are: 1. We have problems on Earth that should be solved first rather than worry about space. 2. Wherever humans go, we make things worse. And 3. We already know what is in space, so we should just stay here. Okay, on point 1, we have problems on Earth that should be solved, rather than worry about space. Political problems will always exist because society will always need a course of action to take on the current issues of the time. Now, problems such as the suffering STEM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math, education in the United States, can be summed up in this interview by Michio Kaku.
Michio Kaku, you write in Visions, in the U.S., the best scientific minds are often absorbed by the Pentagon, which uses their talents on new generations of weapons. Even redirecting a tiny percentage of the military budget to pure science could have a profound effect on the development of technology. What about the National Science Foundation? What about our system of national laboratories? What about private enterprise?
If you take a look at the system of national laboratories, they really have done the yeoman's work of pushing the boundaries of science. But, you know, hey, we're entering a new period, a period where the best minds and the funding is not necessarily going into that direction. I once had lunch with Freeman Dyson, very well-known physicist, and he grew up in England in the 30s. And he said there was a very disturbing feature of England in the 30s, that it was a society in decline. It was decaying. All the best minds were no longer going into engineering and chemistry and physics. The best minds were going into the London Stock Exchange. They were learning how to massage other people's money rather than create wealth, create chemical factories and new inventions. And then he said something which really shocked me. He said, I see it for the second time. For the second time in my life, he says, I've seen the same pattern. Just like England of the 20s and 30s with the best minds going into coupon clipping and stocks and bonds and stuff like that, massaging other people's money rather than creating wealth. Today at Princeton, he said, where he teaches, it's happening again. The best minds are going into investment banking, massaging other people's money rather than going into physics and chemistry. Well, we all know what happened to Wall Street. It imploded. The best minds of a generation imploded our economy. And we see the consequences that our scientific establishment is eroding as a consequence. Let me give you an example. In the United States, 50% of all PhD physicists are, in graduate school, are foreign-born, 50%. At City University of New York, it's 100% are foreign-born. What we're witnessing is a hemorrhaging of our scientific elite, compensated for by foreigners who then populate our PhD institutions. Now, however, as you've been reading in the papers, China is saying, come on back. The water is fine in China. We'll give you a laboratory. We'll give you whatever you want if you come back to China. Well, this is unstable. It can't last. Remember, the British began to decline when their scientific establishment began to crumble. Our scientific establishment has been maintained by a brain drain. We still get the best scientists around the world and send them to Silicon Valley. 50% of Silicon Valley, by the way, is foreign-born. 50% of the scientists there are foreign-born. But it's unstable. It can't last forever, especially because the Indians and the Chinese are saying, come on back. The water's fine. You don't have to be in the United States anymore. So I think it's a warning. It's basically the canary in the mine shaft telling us, watch out. We could go the same way as England.
Now, how does the U.S. get back that drive to innovate? Well, by going into space. In the 1960s, President Kennedy delivered this speech.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. If we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival, on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
And with that motivation, the United States did not only go to the moon, but inspired several scientists and engineers to kickstart the computer revolution, which we are living in today. People also say that going to Mars will create its own problems, such as nuclear weapons will be okay, since there will be no repercussions on Earth. This line of logic can be applied to chemical weapons, and we have seen how the international community has responded to the chemical weapons attack in Syria. Point 2. Wherever humans go, we make things worse. Well, that's a really dark view of the world. Although humans are responsible for anthropomorphic climate change, world hunger, slavery, and other terrible things, we also have to remember that humans also have done things to solve these problems. In Norway, the electrical grid is mostly run on renewable resources, such as hydroelectric and wind power, which reduces the emissions of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And with slavery, the British Empire realized how terrible it was, so they made slavery illegal in 1833, and most of the world followed suit. I'm looking at you, Qatar. Finally, point 3. We already know what's in space, so we should just stay here. Sure, we have a general idea of what's on Mars and on the moon, but we have no idea what dark matter and dark energy are, and they make up the majority of the universe, and directly going to Mars and the moon will not answer this question. But, like I said previously, just trying will inspire future scientists and engineers to look into these concepts and look at these things in a different perspective. Also, there were things we thought we knew about, but with further research, it turns out that things aren't as simple as they seem. The best example of this is the theory of geocentrism, which early astronomers state that all the planets and the sun orbited the Earth. But Copernicus and Galileo came along and said, hey, that doesn't make any sense, and proposed the heliocentric model, which is pretty much universally accepted. So, in conclusion, Elon Musk has revived the public belief in going to Mars, but this time we can't let space exploration fall to the wayside. After the golden age of American innovation in the 1960s, the American education system has tanked from being one of the best in the world to being infested by ideologues who allow American universities to sustain their money, while STEM fields take the hit. I'm in university and I see this happening. Yeah, you can tell I'm a bit passionate about this. So what do you think about NASA and SpaceX's race to Mars and the regression of STEM, even as society is going through one of the biggest technological revolutions in human history? Like and subscribe if you want to see more. But that's all I have to say. See ya!